Welcome to the very first Inspired Championship Boxing podcast. This is going to be episode one, and we're going to call it the Talk the Talk podcast because me and Kyle Smith will have the luxury of talking the talk from the comfort of our own homes and discuss all those that have to walk the walk and do the hard part. Kyle, introduce yourself, buddy.
Yeah, I'm Kyle. I'm a journalist, obviously. More importantly, I box for a club called Rugy ABC. I've boxed since I was about 12 years old now, 21 now, so it's been quite a while being punched in the head, and I can still think for myself quite well. Yeah, so obviously we're going to be doing this. We're going to be doing a podcast. Going to be like boxing, MMA, a bit of a mix, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah, everything combat sports really, which suits well with ICB being a boxing promotion, but all combat sports. We'll hopefully get plenty of guests, guys from ICB will come on, and hopefully external professionals as well who want to come on and fancy a chat as well. But in regards to when you're talking about what we're going to be covering, go on, buddy. Sorry,
as I say, we'll have to warn them before we get who on. Mr. Hickman.
Mr. Niall Hickman, yeah, he's a boxing expert, and we'll definitely get him on. But yeah. I mean, let's start with the big combat sports event. It was last weekend. It'll be ready for Leon Edwards, our own Brit, fighting this weekend. We'll start with Jan Blachowicz, Israel Adesanya. Obviously, Jan won by decision, which is probably a pretty fair decision in the end, wasn't it? I didn't disagree by any means, but anything you notice in the boxing side of things in the stand-up?
To be honest, it was a lot more technical than I thought, especially from Jan. He's bulldozed quite a lot of his opponents before, hasn't he? You know, the big Polish power, that vendetta that kind of goes on. But to be honest, it was a good game plan for both of them, I thought, especially in terms of striking. For all 5 rounds, I felt the range was quite long. I expected that from Adesanya, to be honest, especially if Adesanya's quite a slim build, isn't he, for middleweight alone? So going to light heavyweight, you don't really want to be trading with the likes of Jan and stuff with that type of power. And I think he's obviously quite smart. He understands that. So in terms of the range, I thought it would benefit Israel, but to be honest, I think Jan was excellent because he was even though you've got like your boxing range and your striking range, when you're in boxing range, you're not close enough to throw your shots, as per se, but you kind of just titivate in between the two. And to be fair, Jan was far out of both. And I think that was making Adesanya kind of force shots and force his kickboxing, which we know how prolific he is with his kickboxing. But then I just think he kind of drew Adesanya onto him slightly, and then as you see the takedowns in the later rounds swaying the fight, I think it was a great game plan, but a really fascinating watch for both guys as well. I think there was moments of promise for both, and there wasn't really, I'd say, a dominant performer as per se. I think they both had moments, but Jan had slightly more.
Well, like you say, and I think one thing that I'd heard sort of from the fight was a good big guy beats a good small guy, which I know we had sort of half mentioned when we'd spoke as well. And I mean, it's not a good idea to concede any rounds as a fighter, but Jan perhaps exerting less energy is an argument the first couple of rounds. I mean, he was just able to more or less lie on top of Izzy, and not lie on top as almost cluelessly, like you say. This was a Jan that was very prepared to come out and say, I want to get the respect that I'm owed, sort of thing. I'm a champion. I beat Dominic Reyes, who arguably beat John Jones.
Yeah.
And I'm here to prove a point. And then you go on about the range and stuff and saying how Izzy obviously usually is able to dominate that in his natural weight category, and he steps up to light heavy, and all of a sudden, yes, I think he still had a longer reach than Jan Blachowicz, but Blachowicz is obviously not so far away in terms of that reach that Izzy's perhaps used to having a larger margin for.
Yeah, I think as you said, the Adesanya's always kind of maintained that distance. His kickboxing's one of the best in the UFC, and that middleweight, as you say, with the smaller frames and stuff, being the longer, lankier guy, I know there's some experience. It's kind of like you put yourself in a situation where you can land your strikes and the opponent can't, and if they want to, they've got to kind of force their own mistakes to gamble on coming into range, throwing like strange reaching shots. But to be honest, I thought Adesanya was reaching quite a bit, especially with his jab, which is normally one of his best weapons. I think that's because Jan, as I say, he was outside of striking range, not even boxing range. He was kind of like, there's no way Adesanya would land strikes unless he kind of had to lunge forward and kind of guess the range as he's throwing, if you get what I'm saying, kind of like making, as I say, a lunge. But it's difficult, obviously, because how good Adesanya is, and you might as well say, oh, okay, you want to throw some more punches, throw some more punches as you come into range, such as like a double jab, a bit of a smoke screen, and then start throwing your punches. But I don't really think Adesanya has done that in his career, and that's definitely not a bad thing, because the styles and methods to everyone's game, really. He's very good with his jab, and then he kind of throws his kicks off jabs, doesn't he? He kind of nullifies you with his jab, and you're thinking about what's coming, and then start, because the leg kicks are also good from both men, to be fair, as well. Especially being outside of range, when you can't really land shots to the head. It's, if you think about the distance, it's much shorter leg to leg than it is kind of fist to face. You get what I'm saying? So he was kind of getting quite frequent the leg kicks, and I thought they both had success with that as well.
I mean, we discuss loads about things with MMA and the leg kicks. Are you a bit surprised that, I mean, Adesanya, obviously, like you've just said, threw plenty of leg kicks. They were both pretty active in that regard. But do you think there could have been more from him, really? That kickboxing ex-champion background sort of thing? Why not be throwing them legs consistently to the body, to the legs? Like you say, there was a few to the head, to be fair. I remember a question mark kick or two.
Yeah.
But do you think against the bigger guy to act as sort of a deterrent to keep him away still? Do you think maybe a few more leg kicks could have been a part of the game plan?
Definitely, to be honest, because in terms of, I always say, like, the best punch to throw in terms of just boxing is your jab, because you set everything up from your jab. It's kind of like a smoke screen. It sets your range. It controls where the fight goes. It's brilliant. But then if you look at MMA, especially now, if you look at the Conor Poirier fight, how much the leg kicks completely obliterated Conor, they're almost like perhaps one of the most important things you can possibly throw. Yeah. Because as Poirier was saying in terms of the McGregor fight, even at times McGregor was checking the calf kick, but because he wasn't turning his shin all the way around, it was still hitting the flesh on the back of his leg, and he was completely compromised. And it's just, what was that? I think they'd fought for 7.5 minutes, 8 minutes, or something of that regard. The leg kicks are crazy now, and as I think we've had this conversation before with MMA, it's kind of a sport where if you as McGregor, he was double world champion, 2-time world champion in different weight classes. Takes a few years out to box, do all this, do all that, and he comes back, and the games like evolved just like that. Leg kicks have now exploded. Calf kicks are now pretty much as frequent as jabs are thrown. It's just a sport where I think you can't rest on your laurels at all. It's constantly evolving. You have to evolve with it at the elite level, and leg kicks are certainly an example of that.
And I mean, a little sideways move here, because you just mentioned double champions. Do you think this properly sort of emphasizes how difficult it actually is to be a double champion? You know, you've got McGregor, Nunes, DC, Henry Cejudo. Do you think almost at times they made it look quite easy to be double champions? I mean, Nunes especially, the best female women's fighter ever, isn't she? But McGregor made it look easy. DC didn't necessarily make it look easy, but still, you've got to beat what's in front of you. Absolutely, you know, he had good wars with Stipe, didn't he? And Cejudo, another guy that made it look easy. Do you think fights like this make you go, actually, for you to win both titles is very, very impressive, even more so than you already believe?
100%, to be honest, because especially if you think of how many there are in the UFC now. You've just said Cejudo, DC, Conor. You know, it's the amount of people doing it is is crazy now. And to think Conor McGregor was the first person to do it, and then since then, everyone in kind of press conferences and stuff are now like, in terms of the legacy, they're saying, "Oh, I want to be double champion. I want to do this. I want to do that." It's like the thing now, isn't it? And I think that's also a testament to the UFC and the caliber of fighters that they have. That, as you've just said, how difficult it is to do it, and you've got fighters now who are basically campaigning from the off to do it. With Adesanya, obviously, he was one fight away from doing it himself. I personally, looking at the two fighters and kind of having a look at scenarios that would play out, I did think Adesanya would beat Jan. I didn't think he'd knock him out. Definitely not. He's a small middleweight, and he'll definitely be a small light heavyweight. But I think in terms of is his style, that doesn't really make a difference. He's not a concussive puncher, is he? As I said, he doesn't throw combination punches. He's kind of like a he'll slowly wear you down and nullify you and kind of pick weaknesses and just keep coming and coming and coming. But we all know how good Israel Adesanya is, and for him not to be able to do it, I think, as you said, just shows how difficult it is to be a champ. But there's no reason why he can't try it again, to be honest. It was a very competitive fight, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think you make a good point, and some people might think, you saying Adesanya is not a concussive puncher might sound a bit unusual after obviously flooring Costa and flooring Whittaker, but at the same time, your point's valid because you're on about how technical he is, and that's because you've got Whittaker before and Costa sort of stepping forward and trying to come at him a little bit. And when you're that technical and a sniper, so to speak, as they suggest he is, of course you're going to find the angles with that oncoming momentum. Of course you take the punches. And when you've got someone like Jan, who was smart enough not to keep stepping into the trouble, but obviously engage but safely.
Yeah,
I think the only difference in the end was, like we said, a big guy who's good beats a small guy who's good.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll put the question to you, is that Adesanya, if he'd have focused on the calorie consumption, because what did he weigh in at officially? It was like 200.5 pounds.
Well, it definitely wasn't. It definitely wasn't 205. I know that for a fact.
No, and I mean, he's fighting 20 extra pounds than he normally would be fighting at. So I mean, you put a 20-pound backpack on, you're not necessarily going to be slower, but you're probably going to have less output because you've got that extra meat on you, haven't you? There is challenges with that, isn't there?
Yeah, especially with the big Polish dude lying on you as well. It's going to be quite taxing.
Who's probably naturally 220, 230 in between there on the night, isn't he? So he's even bigger.
Yeah.
I mean, that's me for the main event, mate. Have you got anything to add on that?
To be honest, that was pretty much it. As I say, it was very interesting from a boxing standpoint and wrestling as well. I think that was what made the difference with Jan. It just shows, as much as obviously I love my boxing and I can talk with a bit more of an educated opinion, MMA isn't boxing. There's 7, 8, 9 other disciplines that go into it, and obviously the fighters know it best. It's just fights can be won with one thing and then lost in the next with another. It's kind of like a crazy sport, and as I say, one which is never going to stay the same.
Yeah. Well, this should be a nice, easy one, to be fair. The co-main for your boxing knowledge, sir.
Yeah.
Amanda Nunes, Megan Anderson. Well, firstly, it didn't get outside of a round, did it? Which is a bit difficult to necessarily say as expected. You assume that Amanda Nunes, the champion, would be the most dominant fighter in the fight. But, I mean, Megan Anderson is 6 foot tall, as Nunes is 5'8". You'd have thought there'd have been a more thorough game plan in respect of Anderson, I would say. What did you think of it?
I remember having this violent conversation where you didn't know it kind of not triggered me in a sense, but especially from a boxing standpoint, I was incredibly impressed with Anderson. The second that the buzzer went, centre control straight away, backing up the stronger opponent. Which she was basically making Nunes work off her. She could control the centre of the octagon. I think she threw a leg kick in the first 6 or 7 seconds, which Nunes she checked and she tried to catch, didn't she? And then as we've said, Nunes landed the right hand in about 15 seconds, and the control from Anderson like that backed up straight away. And I said to you, it's so difficult to criticise, especially when you find someone like Amanda Nunes, crazy talented. But it was quite obvious Anderson's game plan was to hold the centre of the octagon, kind of work from a pressured position, if that makes sense, make Amanda Nunes work, which, to be honest, it sounds perfect to me. But then in 15 seconds, her game plan's been abandoned like that because she got caught with a shot, which I think she was like, it must have really done something, to be fair, that early on, to feel power like that and back up. You've got to be, the alarm bells in your head be ringing straight away. So it's difficult. It's hard to blame Anderson because I don't think you can. But when, as I say, you could see the game plan straight away, and within 15 seconds it's gone just like that. It's difficult to then do anything in the fight.
Well, I mean, Anderson, obviously, as you would as a challenger, she was feeling confident. It was her time to cause an upset, etc. The issue with the weight division, perhaps, is that because of Nunes, you're essentially, there has to be a title holder, and then if you're number one contender, you should essentially get your own little medal, because you haven't really got much of a chance, have you? Bantamweight and featherweight champion. Anderson had 72-inch reach advantage. She had a relatively competent ground game. She had some subs in a game. She got, like you said, decent boxing. She showed that, and you pointed it out. But it's a case of, you saw as soon as that first right hand landed from Nunes, it wasn't even clean, and you could see the little people inside of Anderson's brain sort of looking through the books and thinking, I'm not too sure we've got a response here. There's no technical response necessarily for when someone can punch you that hard. I don't think. Obviously not getting hit, but there's only so far you can run away in a cage that's closed.
One of the best quotes I've ever heard is Mike Tyson saying, "Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth." And there you go. It's an excellent example.
But you just can't, can you? Amanda Nunes, rightful double champ, who's the only one to keep defending it actively, isn't she? Is sort of knocked out Chris Cyborg, Ronda Rousey, she's beaten Miesha Tate, Holly Holmes. All previous champions, she's essentially going, well, I'm just going to beat you, and then I'm just going to be twice as good. A lot of people are saying, what does she do now? Does she try and fight boxing wise? Does she step out and go, I'll go chase these other women's champions in boxing? Or, which has been recommended, does she just stay and keep getting paid? Bring them on, I'll just keep knocking them out and finishing them off however you want. Like you say, she wins this by submission, but what do you think she should do rather? Do you think she should go to boxing and sort of go, well, I can hit anyone and I can hurt them, or stay in MMA and just go, I'm the best, I'll just stay the best, I'm bothered?
As you just said, she is the best, didn't she? You couldn't, I doubt you can argue now she's not the greatest of all time, especially female fighter. I think she's in there in terms of all the fighters put together. She's
pound for pound best, probably.
But as you say, in terms of the boxing thing, obviously Conor's done it before, and I know he fought Floyd Mayweather, and it's kind of a different kettle of fish. But what we were saying earlier about MMA kind of evolving pretty much every single day, the sport changes, things be introduced, different philosophies and stuff. I think, especially when you're going into boxing, you're kind of nullifying the other disciplines, your jiu-jitsu, your wrestling, your grappling, whatever it may be. I think you are kind of doing yourself a little bit of damage, if I'm honest, especially with MMA now, because you see with Conor, his striking's probably improved drastically over the past couple of years, and it is already excellent. But then, as I say, then it's an MMA fight. It's not boxing. So, say if you think about it, leg kicks have been around for quite a while now. I know they've exploded recently, but after if you've got to think as well, especially if you're boxing, you're in a camp, aren't you? So you're sparring, you're doing boxing. It's your only discipline for 8 to 12 weeks, and then you fight. That's pretty much 13 weeks of you being programmed to fight someone, literally just boxing. So your range is completely different. The way you think is different. The way you approach the fight in your head is different. And then you go into MMA with all the different disciplines and stuff, and it's kind of like you're in the ocean then. Yeah. So I don't know. It's I think you could definitely do it. Boxing's incredible. Like it is unbelievable. But in terms of where she's at now, as you say, pretty much GOAT status among anyone. I would be saying carry on taking heads in the UFC and just keep going where you are.
I mean, like we say, the greatest is, like you say, there's no real argument. Of course, there's people like John Jones that has done a lot, and Anderson Silva for his title winning streak, etc. But she's just so dominant. And I mean, you showed that in the end of this fight. Like she clocks Anderson, puts her down, straight to the ground with her for ground and pound, while she's ground and pounding, hitting it with these horrible shots that are just booming in the empty stadium, arena rather. She's then working for each submission. And like when we discussed, it's not just one like submission position she was in. She was in three. She had the armbar she won off, the triangle hold, and then she had this shoulder lock that she could have applied pressure to and finished her with that. So in the end, it was a case of
crazy.
Anderson just has to tap. Yeah, it's mad. And I understand maybe Anderson isn't as strong as some others in the division, maybe, the defensive part of the ground game. But at the same time, it takes a really, really good fighter to find three opportunities essentially in one move. And Anderson just has to go, well, she's either going to destroy my shoulder, break my arm, or choke me out with the triangle. So I'm just going to tap.
Well, as I say, Anderson's a good fighter. We can't escape that fact. She's a very good fighter, and she spent 8 to 12 weeks training for Amanda Nunes, studying Amanda Nunes. We're going to do this, this, and this. Don't do this, this, and this. And within 15 seconds, she's thought,
plan's gone. Yeah.
That's how good Amanda Nunes is. You get what I'm saying? And that's what 12, 13 weeks of work gone in 15 seconds.
Well, I mean, we can leave that fight. I'm surprised we got so much out of it with it only lasting a round and it being so dominant. But I mean, the next fight that was on the card was obviously top to bottom. We're going Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling.
My favourite fight of the night.
Was straight mad. Like the output was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But a very strange ending. But we'll start with the stand up side of things, mate. I've got here total strikes. Petr Yan 103. Aljamain Sterling 119. So I mean,
that's surprising.
The output but the output's decent.
Yeah. To be honest, as I say, looking as a spectator, I don't know if people agree. It looked like Sterling was completely outworking him. As I say, from the first from the first round until when it was obviously stopped, quite strangely, the pressure was unbelievable. And say you can be as good as you want when someone's in your face constantly, slipping shots, threatening with a takedown, mixing things up, throwing volume. It's so difficult to do anything. And it's also a credit to Yan as well, lasting as long as he did. Not saying he was ever in trouble or anything, because I don't think he was. But it's just when you've got someone who's that hungry and that ferocious in front of you, and you still, because as I say, it was an excellent fight again, really competitive. You didn't really know leading into each round who had the control of the fight, did you? It was titivating to and fro, and it's really, really interesting.
No, I agree with you completely. I think my only counter argument personally with how Yan dealt with, the output and stuff is simply because I felt like a lot of the time Petr Yan was covered up. So any punches were coming at him, really, he was just taking them. And he's a pretty good boxer. And the fact of the matter is, when you've got someone that's going to keep closing you down and apply pressure, this is a Petr Yan that's beaten Uriah Faber, Jose Aldo, to name just two.
Yeah.
So when you're surviving in there with Jose Aldo, even though obviously he hasn't been the same since Conor beat him that time, but he is in a position where he's perhaps able to survive. And I mean, in regards to fight IQ, takedowns wise, Sterling had 1 takedown. Yan scored 7 takedowns, and I think he never had any interest in engaging with them takedowns when he's got into the canvas. But he secured them with little trips.
Yeah,
and he was just able to kick at his legs and just leave him there if he wished. And at the same time, he knew that he would just score the points, chop away at the legs, like I say, and then go, actually, Sterling's a very, very decent wrestler. He's an All-American. I'm not really going to come and engage with you. So I'll just score the points, leave you on your back, and then you can come back up and we'll box again.
As you say, there's so much things that go into kind of tactics of fighting that people don't, well, I say quite a lot of people do realise now. But it's just, as you say, Sterling's an incredible wrestler, and Jan in himself is an excellent MMA. He's not just striking, is he? He can mix it up with the best of them.
Yeah.
But it's just, as I say, you've got a game plan. You have to stick with it no matter what. Because when you've prepared for something, the fight starts going in different directions. You almost start to panic a little bit. And if Jan's sitting there trying to wrestle, like playing into Sterling's game plan, then it'd be a bit unnerving. And although I think he was being overworked on the feet, Sterling was kind of backing him up. The takedown, I noticed quite a lot of the times he was feinting takedowns, and it was drawing an uppercut out of Jan. Because if you think as you come down for the takedown, the uppercut's the perfect shot. And every single time Sterling was kind of feinting with that, the shot was being drawn. So I think he was definitely not put off from the takedowns, but he can see straight away he's reactive to what I'm trying to do. So Sterling was definitely the aggressor in the fight, because Jan was reacting to what Sterling had to offer, if that makes sense. Which, interesting, in the fourth round, when it was stopped at the start, I thought it, for the first time in the fight, it changed a little bit, because I think I definitely wouldn't say Sterling was fatigued or tired, because he wasn't. He had a lot left in him. But I think especially from the work that he put in, which was brilliant in the first 3 rounds, he was kind of a little bit heavy going into the fourth. And I thought Jan was able to come forward a bit more. And when you give someone with the striking credentials of Jan the room, the fight then changes hands. And I think it was slowly developing as to Jan then becoming the aggressor and Sterling reacting. But as I say, the stoppage was just incredibly unfortunate and quite bizarre. But it's the fight business, isn't it? Things happen.
No, it is. These things do happen. And I mean, just before we get on to, obviously the situation of it, the finish and the disqualification, in regards to, you were saying the output and Sterling perhaps getting tired, etc. Do you think, obviously I'm 99.9% sure there'll be a rematch, because you can't just end a fight like that and then there not be a rematch. But do you think there's definitely an element of maybe Sterling needs to think about how he approaches the fight, maybe take sort of 5-10% off the gas, and then he can perhaps produce still a high quality output, but throughout 4 rounds, 5 rounds, as opposed to the 2 and a bit that he managed, really, because in the third you saw him flagging.
Yeah, as I say, to be honest, I thought up until if it wasn't stopped in the fourth round and you had to score the fight, I think you'd have Sterling winning, in my personal opinion. But then, as you say, the kind of the stats also point. How many takedowns was it for Jan against Sterling? Was it 1-7 or 6 or something?
It was 7-1.
Yeah. Which is crazy, because, as I say, when you're watching the fight, this is why it's also so difficult to judge. Sterling was the aggressor through, I'd say, 70% of the fight. And although Jan was still having success, he was still kind of baiting shots and setting up offense on moving backwards. I thought Sterling was doing well in crowding him, not letting him set shots perfectly. You don't want the technician to have the time to work, do you? You have to try and drown them, which is what he said in the press conference. I think obviously you have to adjust, because in the position where the illegal knee was landed, you've got to address that situation and think how you got there, because you've got Jan on top of you. I know he's not in a dominant position, but it's a submissive position for Sterling to be in, isn't it? So you've got to assess that and look at the sequence and see how that conclusion happened, if that makes sense.
No, definitely.
I think Jan has more to do in terms of adjustments.
Well, I think they both could have done better. I mean, it's a bit of a weird one with how it ended. I mean, you're talking about the position he was in. Of course, like, you do have to address being taken down so often or tripped so easily, because against a competent wrestler, you'd have been in serious trouble. Or not so much a competent wrestler, because Jan can wrestle, but more so someone that will engage with him on the canvas and look to put him away if he can. But, I mean, the referee, Mark Smith, warned Jan about his opponent being downed like seconds before. And just to touch base with anyone that wouldn't know, if your opponent's grounded, be it a hand on the floor, a knee on the floor, both hands, essentially not stood up, and you take a knee to it's sometimes it can be accidental, trying to meet them as they come up, but he'd been warned, and later it was it come out rather, that his corner had said it's okay to do it. And so he's clocked him straight in the face
Yeah,
with a knee. And that's where you've got Sterling lying on his back, looking very dazed.
yeah. It's
Just a
as
strange
it's a
ending.
very very weird stoppage. Yeah, it's difficult because obviously Jan is a UFC champion. He beat Aldo to win the title in his last fight, but it's I think it shows how quick Jan's kind of ascended through the ranks because I'm no way, shape, or form insinuating that he doesn't know the rules because it's quite evident that a UFC champion will. But for his corner to say that and to kind of act on it, it's as you say, it's just a bit bizarre because even before the referees kind of separated them when the knees happened, as if to look at the situation, Jan kind of he lands a knee and he's kind of a bit like, ooh, you understand what I'm saying? He almost like
Yeah,
doubted himself as soon as he did it, and
yeah.
I don't know. It was strange. I think, especially when you got fighters and you all the weapons that they've got at their disposal, they kind of just use them, don't they? And it's difficult because now you've got the situation where it's a bit of an unjust ending. A champion has been dethroned and a challenger has been crowned champion over something as like complicated and strange as this. You almost feel like the fight hasn't finished.
No, and I think that's why it sets up probably an even more interesting rematch. It was a bit weird to see at the end that um, Jan is stood sort of fist up, arm raised, like a defiant champion, even though he evidently has
Yeah,
done wrong, and it almost lacks in remorse. And I think, you may have the caliber and attributes of a champion, but perhaps that wasn't the way to carry yourself as a champion. And I mean, you can't take anything away from Sterling. I did have when I was watching it, I was a bit like, has he really hurt him as much as he's showing there? But then again, I haven't had a champion knee me square in the face, and how
yeah,
would I react to it? Do you know what I mean? I probably wouldn't start my eyes open like Sterling did. It's one of them, isn't it? How can you argue? So
yeah,
Sterling's well within his right to not try and stand up, because there's times where people would try and live by that warrior spirit where they stand, and then because they just want to be tough and it's in their nature, they're still dazed and they'll just get KO'd and then they lose their
yeah.
opportunity anyway. So why not? You've proven you can compete with him in that 3-4 rounds. So why not? I think he's done the right thing there, safety wise. If he's got concussion, of course you're not going to carry on. Why would you?
If you try and simplify it as much as you can, and I know a lot of things are not a lot of things play into why it's so complicated and why people think Jan and why people think Sterling, blah 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 blah. But the simple black and white kind of overlooking fact is Jan threw an illegal strike. It's Jan's responsibility that the fight is finished, and it's difficult to
Yeah.
kind of just leave it as that and just say that's it, that's the end. Sorry, you've lost your belt over something like this. But as I say, if you're thinking about it black and white, the fight wouldn't have ended if Jan didn't throw an illegal strike. So you can't sit there slating Aljamain Sterling saying, why have you done this? Why didn't you try and fight on? That's no way to win your belt. He's not the one who threw the illegal strike. So it's just
Yeah.
you've just got to look at it black and white and just accept what's happened. And as you say, the rematch now is what 3 times more appealing than it could have been before. It's just the fight almost feels like it's in the 6th round of 12, if it in boxing terms, especially. Like it's almost like you feel like when the first bell goes for the rematch, it's gonna start in the 5th round.
And I mean, it is going to be a good competitive rematch. And I'll move on to the next fight really now, simply because it perhaps wasn't a competitive match like that one we've just mentioned.
Yeah,
Islam Makhachev, Drew Dober. Drew Dober had come off the back of quite a decent win. I don't know if it was off the back actually, but he'd had a decent win against Alexander Hernandez,
yeah,
and it was he looked really really good in that, because Hernandez is a competent striker. But to give the tiniest bit of context to all anyone would really need to know about, Makachev is a close friend, former training partner, obviously,
there
of
we
when
go.
Khabib would have been
Yeah,
fighting.
yeah,
And when you're a world champion sambo wrestler and you're training with a fellow sambo champion wrestler, um, you're going to be pretty good on the ground, aren't you?
Yeah. I think this isn't going to sound good coming from a boxer, but if I was in the UFC now and I seen someone from Dagestan with a wrestling background, someone with ties to Khabib or Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov, I'd be running the other direction now, if I'm perfectly honest. It's just crazy, isn't it? As you say, both excellent fighters, and then you've got a fight that plays out so one-sided. It's difficult to say that how the hell do you beat them? Because I've had this conversation with you, haven't I, privately, saying I thought Khabib Nurmagomedov would have been beaten in his 29 fights that he's had in his MMA career, not for the point of saying that he's got weaknesses or whatever, because obviously everyone's got weaknesses, but I just think people, especially me, being like a boxing purist, as per se, you overlook how Russian Sambo and how kind of dominant they've drilled it into themselves and how they use it. It's so difficult to beat, and obviously mentally as well. Obviously, I think a lot of fighters will think, okay, I might have a striking advantage here. I'm not discrediting Nurmagomedov's striking or whatever per se, but as like a rule, especially if you say Conor, Poirier, you know, a lot of Khabib opponents, they're going to have the striking advantage. But to be continuously shot at and double leg, single legged, collar tied, taken to the ground, it's demoralising as a fighter, I bet. And as I say, with game plans, it's just, you'd be so draining mentally and physically to fight them.
Well, there was a period during the Dober and Makachev fight where Dober somehow manages to squeeze out of a position on the ground, and you hear the commentary team for the UFC say this is his chance to get up, and all of a sudden Makachev, almost just like a bear, just goes no, like you're staying.
No chance.
And I mean, you can't really knock Dober in his approach to it, because for the first sort of what felt like deja vu for all sort of couple of rounds, you know, the three that it lasted before the finish in the third, is Dober's trying to kick low and keep that range in. All of a sudden, at any point that he gets within sniffing distance of Makachev just goes, we're going down, and it's done.
Yeah. It's like my dad's not a big fan of MMA, and he watches sometimes when I'm doing my studying or whatever, and I'm watching a fight. He looks over my shoulder. You always say, like, why is he letting the wrestler take him down? And I'm like, it's not. I think a fighter knows when someone's shooting for a takedown. Stopping it is literally another world away. 29 people who thought Khabib would have said, right, he's going to shoot, and he's not going to let go of me. Once we come into range, he's going to try and initiate grappling exchanges, same as Makachev. But actually physically doing it is, as I say, completely different to. I guarantee most of the fighters anticipate the takedowns, anticipate the clinches, whatever. But stopping it is just it's a lifetime of work culminated into the point where people know it's happening and they can't do anything about it.
No, definitely. And I think the biggest difficulty is with your takedowns. There's such a variety of doing it. You know, people can immediately shoot in your classic almost. You take the double leg and you put them to the ground. But with Makachev, he was just simply clinching with Dober. And he was doing these little inside-out leg kicks where there was a gap between Dober's leg, and he was putting his left leg just behind Dober's right and just folding it and then just taking him on the angle. And it was just a bit like, you've got, you know, unless you don't come anywhere near him to clinch you, but you've got to get him within range. Because, I mean, for the third round, Dober's obviously 2 rounds down after being mauled, and this Makachev blanket has just smothered him for 2 rounds. And, I mean, Dober's on his back and desperately firing these elbows. And it just becomes a case of, you know, Makachev just soaks it up and then just continues to work position freely and fluidly. And like you say, you just can't stop it.
I think Dober would have probably been a lot more comfortable when someone's shooting at you, obviously for double legs, single legs, or whatever. It's a takedown attempt, and you know kind of where the position the fight's trying to go. But I think especially in terms of a clinch, even though you're grappling, you're still in a stand-up position, able to throw strikes. So I think especially for Dover, it was probably a slightly bit more comfortable with, as you say, predominantly grappling exchanges on the feet. But if you think about it for a wrestler, it's kind of like a bear trap, as you say, because even though it's not a takedown, it's not then wrestling in a grounded position. They can still get underhooks. They can still kind of tie up and look to see openings of how to take the fight to the ground. It's a standing position, so you lure them into like a false sense of security. Okay, we're still standing up, we can still throw strikes, but you're still in a wrestling exchange with a Dagestani wrestler. So it's almost, as I say, it's false security, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, like you say, when you hear Dagestan and wrestler, in like you say, he's your next opponent, you don't really fancy it. But in regards to next opponents, I mean, fair play Dober, he didn't make any excuses. He knew he'd been beat. He applauded at the end. It was one of them that you go, fair enough, Drew Dober, you'll be back. But with Makhachev, I think he was ranked 14th at the start of the night. And it's not unrealistic at all. After the fight, he's essentially said, I want a top 5 fighter. Give me Tony Ferguson. I'll squash any beef or any argument that he had, because obviously all the fights he was meant to fight Khabib, and they've sort of just gone, let's do that. I haven't seen the responses on the socials, but I mean, any fight with Tony Ferguson would be a good one rather, and I think Makhachev and Ferguson would be really interesting. The only risk would Ferguson be too much of a step up immediately for Makhachev?
It's, as I say, you don't know what step ups are nowadays, especially with MMA, because the array of talent is crazy. You can have one guy who's ranked 30 if he fights someone in the top 10 and demolishes them, or it could be the other way around. It's so difficult. As you say, we could have someone who's expertly drilled with the kickboxing, the striking, who hasn't really, obviously he's got a wrestling credentials, but doesn't really use it in the same way as Makhachev or however would. Then when the two styles clash, it's kind of on the night who can exert the game plan more effectively. I think that's what makes a sport so good. Is it's not just there's 1,001 ways to win a fight in MMA, isn't there? And I think it's so difficult to have such a broad set of skills, especially, as I say, you got like wrestlers from Dagestan and Russia that are just maulers, expert wrestlers. Then you've got, American top team like AKA, kickboxers, stuff like that. It's crazy. There's almost like there's no fighter the same as another person in the UFC, and it might seem like an obvious statement, but in terms of like technicality, how to like approach fights, it must be so weird for coaches, because they've got to study and see what the other guy's doing so much more than you would have in terms of, like, say, just strictly boxing.
No, definitely. I think you lead me on to our final sort of look at the last fight on the main card. There's so many different ways in which fights could be won and lost. And one lovely little way to finish a fight is a KO, which this last fight was light heavy. Thiago Santos versus Alexander Rakic. I think Santos coming into this was ranked 2nd, Rakic 4th. If that isn't right, it's not far from that. Some little stats that definitely for this one was Curse of the Commentator, that Rakic has finished UFC opponents wise, a third of his UFC opponents KO or TKO. Thiago Santos had finished half of his UFC fights by TKO or KO. So there's no reason to think that this wouldn't have ended in a knockout by someone pretty early. What was your thoughts on it?
I don't know. It played out quite, as you say, the commentator's curse was definitely in effect, wasn't it? You've got two guys who bring a stupid, obscene amount of power, and you get nullified into an expectation of this is going to be lights, camera, action, done, dusted, out you go, isn't it? But as I say, with fighting, you never ever know the next step, and it was much different than what people anticipate, I think. As I say, commentator's curse was very, very much a driving factor in this one.
No, definitely. And sadly, as boring as it may have made it in the end, without talking the guys down that are two elite guys, but it almost became a bit of a Mexican standoff where Rakic knew that he had the power to put Santos out, but Santos would have the power to, respond with it, and vice versa. They were both a bit like, I need to score and be a bit active here, but I can't trust myself to explode because I know that I could get clocked. And that is
It's
the issue that you find with this weight of at light heavy.
definitely, as I say, one especially with the heavier categories, one punch changes a fight, doesn't it? In if you're standing across from someone that you know can bang and you can bang yourself, sometimes it can result in, I wouldn't say stale, because technically there's loads of substance to these type of fights, and there was with this one. But you kind of like, okay, so the fans want to see blood, guts, and gore, and you want to try and go gung-ho and knock the guy out in the first round, and you get flattened yourself, and where's that left you? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of, I think people should appreciate a tiny bit more that these guys are risking their lives, and especially when you're against a power punch or whatever, you can't take stupid risks, and even more so, you might take a little bit more risks against someone who's not a concussive puncher, as I say, and even then you run in with a risk of being caught with a well-timed shot that your momentum's leading onto, and even that can turn the favour of the fight, couldn't it? So. I know obviously Dana has been quite critical about fights that aren't packed of action in the past and stuff, and I get he's a promoter and that's obviously his job, but I think these fights are inevitable, and you can't help but respect the guys because they obviously respect their opponent. They're in the UFC, the mecca of MMA. It ain't going to be as straightforward as I've got loads of power, let's knock him out and laugh on the way home. So
No, and I agree with your point. And sadly, for a period of time with Thiago Santos, it looked like it was as simple as get in there, knock your man out, and go home sort of thing. But I mean, he didn't look like the same fight we've been used to seeing with Thiago Santos. I mean, he's had two reconstructive surgeries on his knees after John Jones completely chopped him up and just attacked his
yeah,
legs. And he didn't look like a man that could explode. So if you can only
no,
tentatively fight within range and can't get out of it quickly, you'll know yourself boxing wise. You know, you're going to be screwed. And that's one thing that Rakic did pretty well was keep bobbing in and out and just keep scoring them points and landing shots and then staying away from that massive hammer. Because really, if you told me who would be more powerful out of Rakic or Santos, I'd put my money on Santos. So Rakic
yes,
fought it pretty well. Just
yes,
Santos sadly looked laboured, and it looked like I've seen a few other promotions say that Santos. There'll be people licking their lips, going, "I can fight a top five opponent in Santos here, who actually at the minute is fighting like you know top 10, maybe top 15 fighter, because he's just so immobile."
yeah. Well, as you was on about with the power there, in my experience, definitely, I fight at between 66 and 70 kg, which is obviously quite light because I'm 6'1/2", which is very very lean. I spar a lad called Liam who's a similar weight to me, and obviously we're both quite lanky, not concussive punchers, quite I'd say kind of pressure fighters that we kind of we don't have a crazy amount of power. We kind of wear people down like volume punching as per se. And I remember one of our heavyweights called Nathan. I think he's 96 kg or something crazy like that. He had a fight coming up, and they said, "Do you want to spar Nathan?" Obviously, it's going to be like 30% power. He's not going to knock you out because he's twice the size of you. And I was like, "Yeah, that's fine." And I just remember I knew he wasn't even throwing punches as strongly as he could. And obviously, this is a natural heavyweight, as the kind of guys we're talking about here. And literally being caught with the first jab, which was kind of like half-assed from him. I remember thinking like, what that feels like nothing I've ever felt before. And as I say, Liam is the same weight as me. He hit me with some absolute dingers, proper like torque shots, straight extension, perfectly on the chin. And I thought that was a good shot, to be fair. And then this guy's jabbed me at like 50% capacity, and I've had my life flash before my eyes. So it's just so the power. I think people can't underestimate power. It's one of the craziest things about fighting is like, especially feeling it and being on the receiving end of it. Someone can be strong and punch fairly decent, and you know about it and it hurts you. But then you can have the guys that punch you and you think, no chance that I can't get hit with some of those. And that's, as I say, why these type of fighters have to be so precarious.
No, definitely. I think, I mean, whoever won this is probably looking like an eliminator for a shot at the title now, to be quite honest. You know,
Yeah,
Rakic probably looks like if he doesn't fight Jan Blakovic, then he's probably going to be holding off with one more one more fight. But Rakic won in the end by decision. There was very no upset here, was there really? As soon as the fight went around, we saw it was going to be, like you say, still technical, but it was a little bit sad looking at Santos being immobile, and
Yeah,
Rakic did what any competent fighter would do, and that
definitely.
was beat him.
Yeah.
But that is that's all from me and Kyle on this very first episode of the Talk
Too
the
much
Talk
rambling.
podcast for ICB. Plenty, obviously, we had to say. Any
Yeah.
comments, guys? Let us know what you think. And we'll be back next week with some more boxing insight. We'll look at some boxing events, as well as a little look at the UFC event this weekend that has Britain's own Leon Edwards on there as well.
Sweet.
So thanks, guys, and thank you, Kyle.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, buddy.
No problem.